In the hallways of Eastbrook High School, a quiet transfer student was about to face the most dangerous confrontation of her senior year. What started as an attempt to blend in and make friends took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the school's most ruthless social predator. Keiko Tanaka wasn't your typical new girl trying to fit in. For over 12 years, she had spent her life mastering the ancient discipline of Kyokushin karate under her grandfather's watchful eye, known for her devastating nickname Yama-kuzushi, the mountain breaker. When she encountered Brianna Ellis orchestrating a systematic cyberbullying campaign against her, she had no idea she was walking into a trap designed to destroy her reputation forever. Keiko's choice to finally stop running from who she really was would lead to a confrontation that would expose the true meaning of strength. What began as a desperate attempt to remain invisible would become a transformation that changed an entire school community. The students of Eastbrook High would never be the same after discovering that sometimes the person you choose to victimize is exactly the person the world needs to see. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Keiko Tanaka never imagined that transferring to a new school would become the most dangerous decision of her senior year when she walked through the glass doors of Eastbrook High on that crisp September morning. She thought she was finally leaving the chaos behind. What she didn't know was that sometimes running from trouble only leads you straight into the arms of something worse. Sometimes the person you're trying so hard to hide from is exactly the person you need to become. The October morning felt different from the warm Los Angeles sun she had left behind just 3 weeks earlier as Keiko navigated the crowded hallway between first and second period. She had perfected the art of moving through crowds without drawing attention to herself. Her straight black hair fell naturally around her shoulders, and her simple jeans and hoodie concealed the lean, muscular frame that had made her a legend in Kyokushin karate tournaments across Southern California. At 17, Keiko had spent more than half her life training under the watchful eye of her grandfather Yuki Tanaka, a former champion from Okinawa, who had brought the ancient discipline of traditional karate to their small dojo in Little Tokyo. What her new classmates at Eastbrook High didn't know, what nobody in suburban Illinois knew except her mother, was that Keiko Tanaka was one of the most accomplished young martial artists on the West Coast. She had started training at the age of 5 when her grandfather had enrolled her in classes after her father's sudden death left their family searching for stability and strength. By the time she was 10, she was competing at regional tournaments, defeating opponents years older with a combination of technical precision and natural athletic ability that impressed even seasoned senseis. By 13, she was dominating state-level competitions, and by 16, she had claimed 3 consecutive California championships in her division, earning the nickname Yama-kuzushi, or mountain breaker, from her grandfather for her ability to topple opponents who seemed impossible to defeat. The trophies and championship belts were carefully packed away in boxes in her new bedroom, along with the newspaper clippings that documented her rise through the competitive ranks. Her mother had been clear about their approach to this new start in Illinois. Keiko was to focus on her academics, make friends, and try to have a normal teenage experience. The intense training schedule and constant competition pressure had consumed much of her adolescence, and her mother wanted her daughter to have the chance to simply be a regular high school student. As she slipped into her second period biology class and took a seat in the middle row, Keiko reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. Back in Los Angeles, she had been known and respected. Her sensei treated her as a serious martial artist. Her training partners pushed her to improve daily, and even her academic teachers understood that she was balancing demanding competition schedule with her studies here at Eastbrook High. She was just another quiet transfer student trying to blend into the background. The biology lesson began with Mrs. Chun explaining cellular reproduction, but Keiko found her attention drifting to the social dynamics playing out around her. Through careful observation over the past 3 weeks, she had begun to map the school's complex hierarchy. The athletic students dominated the prime territory near the windows there. Varsity jackets and team colors marking their social status. The academic achievers clustered near the front rows, their advanced placement textbooks and college prep materials signaling their priorities. The drama and art students had claimed the creative spaces, often engaged in animated discussions about their latest productions. But it was the group that commanded the center of every room that caught Keiko's attention most, a collection of perfectly styled students who seemed to glide through the hallways with an aura of untouchable confidence. At the center of this constellation was Brianna Ellis, a stunning blonde senior whose Instagram account had gained local celebrity status. Her followers hung on every post, every outfit, every carefully crafted moment of her seemingly perfect life. Keiko had learned to recognize the subtle signs of Brianna's influence. The way conversations quieted when she approached, the way other students sought her approval with desperate glances, the way teachers seemed to defer to her family's reputation in the community. It was a different kind of power than what Keiko had known in the dojo, but it was power nonetheless. During lunch, Keiko had settled into a routine of sitting alone at one of the smaller tables near the back of the cafeteria, using the time to review her notes or read ahead in her textbooks. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe and predictable. Today, however, as she approached her usual spot, she noticed someone was already there. Marcus Lee looked up from his AP physics textbook and offered a tentative smile. Keiko had seen him in several of her advanced classes and noticed how other students seemed to either ignore him completely or regard him with barely concealed disdain. His grades were obviously excellent, but his social standing appeared to be non-existent. "Mind if I sit here?" Marcus asked quietly, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "I usually eat in the library, but it's closed for maintenance today." Keiko nodded and sat down, grateful for the company, even if neither of them spoke much during the meal. She noticed how Marcus kept his eyes down when groups of athletes passed their table, and how he seemed to shrink into himself whenever laughter erupted from the popular tables. It was a survival strategy she recognized from her own experience. As they gathered their things to leave, Marcus hesitated. "Thanks for letting me sit with you," he said. "Most people around here think I'm some kind of social disease." "Most people around here don't know what they're talking about," Keiko replied, surprising herself with the response. For the first time since arriving at Eastbrook High, Keiko felt a small connection to another person. But as they walked toward their afternoon classes, she caught sight of Brianna Ellis watching them from across the cafeteria. The popular girl's expression was calculating, measuring, as if she were evaluating a potential threat. In her peripheral vision, Keiko noticed Tyler Cross, the quiet photographer from her journalism class, adjusting his camera lens. He had been documenting student life for the school newspaper, and something about his thoughtful approach to capturing moments had caught her attention. Unlike the other students who seemed obsessed with posting every moment to social media, Tyler appeared more interested in finding the stories. Beneath the surface, the final bell of the day rang, and as students flooded toward the exits, Keiko overheard a snippet of conversation that made her blood run cold. "Did you see the new girl talking to Marcus the Freak?" one of Brianna's friends whispered. "Maybe we should find out what her deal is before she becomes another problem." Keiko quickened her pace toward the parking lot where her mother would be waiting to pick her up. As she walked, she felt the familiar weight of being watched, evaluated, measured for weaknesses. That night, as she lay in her new bedroom, surrounded by boxes that still needed unpacking, Keiko pulled out her phone and called her grandfather in Los Angeles. "Oh, Jisen," she said, using the Japanese term for grandfather. "I think I might have made a mistake coming here." Yuki Tanaka's weathered voice carried across the miles with the wisdom of 7 decades. "Keiko-chan, remember what I taught you about the mountain. The mountain does not move because the wind is strong. The mountain endures because it knows its own foundation. Your strength is not in your fists, it is in your spirit. But remember, use that strength only when there is no other choice." as Keiko hung up the phone. She had no idea that her choice to remain invisible was about to be taken away from her completely. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Eastbrook High's photography lab as Keiko carefully adjusted the aperture on the vintage camera Tyler Cross had loaned her for their group project. 2 weeks had passed since her quiet lunch conversation with Marcus, and somehow word had spread that the mysterious new girl was both academically gifted and surprisingly approachable. Tyler had approached her after journalism class with an invitation that caught her completely off guard. "We're working on a feature about new perspectives at Eastbrook," Tyler had explained, his voice carrying none of the artificial enthusiasm she had grown accustomed from other students. "Your photos from the nature walk assignment were incredible. I was wondering if you'd want to contribute some shots for the school paper." Keiko had hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself, but there was something genuine about Tyler's interest, something that reminded her of the focused dedication she had known in the dojo. Tyler wasn't trying to impress her or gain social currency. He simply recognized talent and wanted to showcase it. Now, as they worked side by side in the quiet darkroom, Keiko found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving Los Angeles. Tyler moved with the same careful precision she had learned from years of martial arts training. Every movement deliberate, every decision purposeful. "You have really good instincts," Tyler said as he examined one of her prints. "This shot of the oak tree during the storm captures something most people would miss. The way the branches bend but don't break. It's like they're dancing with the wind instead of fighting it." Keiko felt a warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. It had been months since anyone had recognized her artistic eye in Los Angeles. Her photography had always taken a backseat to her karate achievements. But Tyler saw something in her work that went beyond technical skill. "My grandfather taught me to observe before acting," Keiko said, surprising herself by sharing something personal. "He always said that understanding your environment is the first step to mastering it." "Sounds like a wise man," Tyler replied. "I'd love to meet him sometime." "He's back in California," Keiko said, her voice growing quieter. "We had to leave pretty suddenly." Tyler nodded, seeming to sense that there was more to the story, but respecting her privacy enough not to push. As they continued working, Keiko found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way he handled the delicate equipment with respect, and the thoughtful expression he wore when studying a particularly challenging composition. What neither of them noticed was the figure watching through the small window in the darkroom door. Samira Patel had been tasked by Brianna Ellis with what she euphemistically called social reconnaissance. Officially, she was supposed to be helping with student council publicity, but everyone knew her real job was to keep Brianna informed about potential threats to her carefully constructed social empire. Samira pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message to Brianna. "New girl spending time alone with Tyler in the photo lab. They seem pretty comfortable together." The response came back within seconds. "Find out everything you can about her background, family, why she transferred here. Nobody just shows up senior year without a reason." 3 periods later, Keiko was making her way to the library during her free period when she heard voices coming from one of the study alcoves. Marcus Lee was pressed against the wall, while 2 varsity football players loomed over him. "Come on, genius," one of them sneered. "Just let us copy your calculus homework. It's not like anyone's going to believe you if you rat us out." "I can't," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Peterson checks our work against online solutions. If you turn in my answers, he'll know." "That sounds like a you problem," the second player said, grabbing Marcus's backpack and dumping the contents onto the floor. "Maybe we need to help you understand how things work around here." Keiko felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same heightened awareness that preceded every tournament match. Her body tensed as her training kicked in, automatically cataloging distances, angles, potential threats. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that a true martial artist seeks to resolve conflict without violence whenever possible, instead of intervening directly. Keiko pulled out her phone and began recording, while positioning herself where the football players could see her. The camera flash reflected off the library windows, and both athletes immediately noticed her presence. "What are you doing?" one of them demanded, "Documenting student life for the journalism." "Class," Keiko replied calmly. "This looks like an interesting study session." The two players exchanged glances, suddenly aware that their behavior was being captured for posterity. They mumbled something about finding a better place to study and quickly departed, leaving Marcus to gather his scattered papers and books. "Thank you," Marcus said as Keiko helped him collect his materials. "But you probably shouldn't have done that. They'll remember your face now." "Let them remember," Keiko replied. "Sometimes being seen is the only way to make sure someone else stays safe." As they walked together toward their next classes, Marcus surprised her with a question. "You're not like other people, are you? There's something different about the way you move, the way you watch everything." Keiko felt her guard go up immediately. "I don't know what you mean." "It's okay," Marcus said quickly. "I'm not trying to pry, it's just that I've been the target of guys like that for 3 years, and nobody has ever stepped in before. Not even teachers. Most people just pretend they don't see it happening." That evening, Keiko was sitting at her desk working on calculus problems when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hey, this is Tyler from photo class. Just wanted to say thanks for helping Marcus today. Word travels fast around here, and what you did was pretty cool." Before she could respond, another message appeared. "Also wanted to give you a heads up. Brianna Ellis has been asking questions about you. Might want to be careful." Keiko stared at the screen, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had hoped to avoid the attention of students like Brianna, but apparently her attempts to help Marcus had placed her directly in the spotlight. That night she called her grandfather again, needing his steady wisdom. "Oh geez, and I think I might be in trouble here. Some of the popular students are starting to notice me, and not in a good way." "Keiko-chan," Yuki Tanaka's voice carried the weight of decades of experience. "In my youth, I learned that there are 2 types of people who seek to test your strength. Those who respect power and wish to learn from it, and those who fear power and wish to destroy it before it can challenge them. Be very careful which type you are dealing with." "How do I tell the difference?" Keiko asked. "Watch their eyes when they look at others who are vulnerable. If they show compassion, they can be trusted. If they show opportunity, they are dangerous." As Keiko hung up the phone, she realized that her quiet period at Eastbrook High was coming to an end. Whether she wanted it or not, she was about to discover which type of person Brianna Ellis really was. What Keiko Tanaka didn't know, as she logged into the library computer during her study period that Tuesday morning, was that Samira Patel had been watching her digital habits for weeks. Brianna Ellis had tasked her best friend with what she called investigative social work, but what was really sophisticated cyberstalking designed to find ammunition against potential threats to Brianna's carefully constructed social empire. Samira had noticed that Keiko always used the same computer in the far corner of the library, always seemed to access the same cloud storage account, and always forgot to fully log out before closing the browser. It was a small security lapse, the kind that most teenagers make without thinking, but in the wrong hands it could become a weapon of social destruction. That morning, as Keiko hurried to her chemistry class, she failed to notice that the browser was still showing her iCloud login screen. Samira slipped into the chair moments later and began systematically exploring the digital remains of Keiko's life in Los Angeles. What she found exceeded even Brianna's wildest expectations. Buried among hundreds of photos of sunsets, homework assignments, and family gatherings was a folder labeled Tournament Footage. Inside were dozens of videos documenting Keiko's rise through the competitive karate circuit. The most recent video made Samira's hands shake as she watched it. A 17-year-old girl in traditional karate gi and black belt was systematically dismantling an opponent who outweighed her by at least 40 pounds. The violence was controlled, precise, brutal, and absolutely mesmerizing. The opponent was a college-aged male competitor from Arizona's state championship tournament. The video quality was professional, suggesting it had been recorded by tournament officials for training purposes. Keiko moved like liquid lightning, every strike calculated, every defense flawless. When her opponent attempted a powerful kick to her midsection, Keiko caught his leg, redirected his momentum, and sent him crashing to the mat with a technique that looked almost supernatural in its efficiency. The video ended with Keiko bowing respectfully to her defeated opponent, helping him to his feet, and accepting a gold medal from tournament officials. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 4 months before her arrival at Eastbrook High. Caption beneath read, California State Champion 3rd Degree Brown Belt Kyokushin Karate. Samira quickly downloaded the video to her phone and sent it to Brianna with a message that would change everything. You need to see this now. The new girl isn't just hiding something, she's hiding everything. Within an hour, the video was circulating through every group chat, every social media platform, and every digital corner of Eastbrook High's interconnected social network. Brianna had added her own caption. Breaking, meet your new classmate Keiko Tanaka, aka the secret psycho who's been pretending to be normal. Share if you think violent freaks should be exposed. By the time Keiko walked into the cafeteria for lunch, the entire school was buzzing with a mixture of fear, fascination, and cruel excitement. Students who had never spoken to her before were pointing and whispering. Groups fell silent as she passed, then erupted in animated discussion the moment she moved beyond earshot. Marcus Lee was waiting at their usual table, his face pale with concern. Keiko, we need to talk. I know, she said, sinking into her chair as the weight of exposure crashed over her. I saw the stairs in the hallway, everyone knows. That video, Marcus said, leaning forward. Is that really you? Keiko nodded, unable to meet his eyes. 3 years of training, 6 hours a day, every day. Competition was my life before we moved here. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to be normal, Keiko said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to just be a regular student who worried about grades and college applications, and maybe finding someone to go to prom with. I never wanted anyone to see me as a weapon. Across the cafeteria, Tyler Cross was furiously typing on his laptop, his jaw clenched with anger. He had spent the morning investigating how the video had been obtained and distributed. What he discovered was a clear case of cyberbullying, privacy violation, and potentially criminal hacking. This is completely illegal, he muttered to himself as he documented the timeline of the leak. They hacked her personal files and distributed them without consent. Tyler looked up to see Brianna Ellis holding court at her usual table, surrounded by admirers as she dramatically recounted her discovery of Keiko's deception. The performance was masterful, combining fear-mongering with social manipulation in a way that painted Brianna as both brave whistleblower and protective community leader. I mean, think about it. Brianna was saying, her voice carrying just far enough to ensure maximum audience. She's been sitting next to us in classes, walking through our hallways, pretending to be this quiet, innocent transfer student, when really she's trained to seriously hurt people. What if she snaps? What if someone accidentally bumps into her and she goes into some kind of karate rage mode? The crowd around her table nodded along, their expressions shifting from curiosity to genuine concern. Brianna had expertly transformed a video showing Keiko's athletic achievement and disciplined training into evidence of mental instability and potential violence. By the end of lunch period, the narrative was set throughout the school. Keiko Tanaka was no longer the quiet new girl. She was the dangerous secret fighter who had deceived everyone. The whispers followed her through afternoon classes. Teachers began watching her with cautious eyes, and students gave her a wide berth in the hallways. That evening, Keiko sat in her bedroom staring at her phone as notification after notification poured in. The video had been shared beyond the school community and was beginning to attract attention from karate enthusiasts who recognized her name and achievements. But the comments from her classmates were brutal, ranging from mockery to genuine fear to suggestions that she should be expelled for her deception. Her mother knocked softly on the door and entered to find Keiko crying for the first time since they had left Los Angeles. They took something private, something I earned through years of hard work and dedication and turned it into a freak show, Keiko sobbed. They made my strength look like mental illness, my discipline look like violence. What do you want to do? Her mother asked gently. I want to disappear again, Keiko said. I want to transfer schools, move to another state, change my name, and never let anyone know who I really am. And if running doesn't work this time, Keiko looked up at her mother, her tears replaced by something harder, more determined. Then maybe it's time to stop running. That night, as Eastbrook High settled into evening quiet, Tyler Cross published an anonymous article in the school's online newspaper titled, "When Privacy Becomes Target Practice: The Digital Assassination of a Fellow Student." He didn't mention Keiko by name, but everyone would know exactly what he was referring to. The article concluded with a challenge that would echo through the hallways for weeks to come. We have a choice. We can be the kind of community that destroys people for being different, or we can be the kind that celebrates strength in all its forms. The question isn't whether Keiko Tanaka is dangerous. The question is whether we are. Meanwhile, in her perfectly decorated bedroom, Brianna Ellis read Tyler's article with a smile of satisfaction. She had successfully neutralized what she perceived as a threat and established herself as the dominant force in the school's social ecosystem. What she didn't realize was that she had just awakened something in Keiko Tanaka that had been sleeping since Los Angeles. The mountain breaker was tired of being broken down. And sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The morning after the video leak, Keiko walked through the hallways of Eastbrook High like a ghost moving through a world that had fundamentally shifted overnight. Students pressed themselves against lockers as she passed, creating an invisible bubble of fear and fascination around her. Some whispered behind cupped hands, their voices carrying fragments of speculation and judgment. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from awe to terror to barely concealed excitement at witnessing what they perceived as a real-life action movie playing out. In their suburban high school, in her first period AP literature class, Mrs. Henderson stumbled through the lesson on character development while stealing nervous glances at Keiko, who sat in her usual seat taking notes as if nothing had changed. The irony wasn't lost on Keiko that they were discussing how authors reveal hidden depths in their protagonists through moments of crisis. She wondered if her classmates would appreciate the literary parallel. During the break between classes, Tyler Cross approached her locker, his camera bag slung over his shoulder and determination written across his face. "We need to talk about what happened," he said, keeping his voice low enough to avoid attracting more attention. "There's nothing to talk about," Keiko replied, mechanically organizing her textbooks with the same precise movements she had once used to arrange her karate equipment. "Everyone knows what they think they know, and that's all that matters to them. That's exactly why we need to talk," Tyler insisted. "I've been investigating how that video was obtained and distributed. What Brianna and her crew did isn't just cruel, it's illegal. They violated your privacy, hacked your personal accounts, and are using stolen content to orchestrate a harassment campaign." Keiko closed her locker and turned to face him for the first time, seeing the genuine anger in his eyes. "And what exactly do you think we can do about it?" "The damage is done, Tyler. Everyone in this school thinks I'm some kind of ticking time bomb waiting to explode." "Not everyone," came a quiet voice from behind them. Marcus Lee stood clutching his physics textbook, his usually nervous demeanor replaced by something resembling resolve. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about how being seen is sometimes the only way to keep someone else safe. Well, maybe it's time someone saw what's really happening here." That afternoon during lunch, Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up in the center of the cafeteria and began speaking in a voice that carried across the room. "I want to tell you all about the kind of person Keiko Tanaka really is." He began as conversations died and attention focused on the normally invisible academic student. 3 weeks ago, when Jake Morrison and his friends cornered me in the library, demanding my homework assignments, nobody helped me. Nobody even pretended to notice what was happening. except for one person. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even Brianna Ellis's table had stopped their animated gossiping to listen. Keiko didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, had no reason to get involved, but she stood up, pulled out her phone, and made it clear that what was happening wasn't going to be ignored. She didn't throw a single punch, didn't make any threats, didn't even raise her voice. She just refused to let me be invisible in my own suffering. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. So when I see people calling her dangerous, when I hear whispers about her being unstable, when I watch you all treat her like she's some kind of monster, I have to have asked myself, where were all of you when I actually needed protection? Where were all of you when real violence was happening right in front of your faces? The silence that followed Marcus's speech was deafening. Keiko felt tears threatening to spill over as she realized that someone understood not just what had happened to her, but what she had been trying to do for others. Tyler began a slow, deliberate clap that gradually spread through sections of the cafeteria, though notably not to Brianna's table, where the popular students sat stone-faced and calculating. After school, Keiko found herself in Mr. Navarro's history classroom, where she had started staying during her free periods to avoid the constant stares, whispers in the common areas. Mr. Navarro was one of the few teachers who hadn't changed his behavior toward her after the video leak, and his classroom had become something of a sanctuary. You know, Mr. Navarro said as he graded papers at his desk, I've been teaching at this school for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of students come and go. What happened to you this week isn't the first time. Someone's been targeted for being different, and unfortunately, it probably won't be the last. Then why doesn't anyone do anything about it? Keiko asked. Why do teachers pretend not to see what's happening? Why does the administration act like cyberbullying and social assassination are just normal parts of high school? Mr. Navarro sat down his pen and looked at her directly. Because it's easier to maintain order than to pursue justice. It's easier to tell victims to ignore their tormentors than to confront the systems that create tormentors in the first place. But just because something is easier doesn't make it right. He paused thoughtfully before continuing. I've watched that video, Keiko, not the version that's been circulating with all the inflammatory commentary, but the original footage that shows a young athlete demonstrating extraordinary skill, discipline, and respect for her opponent. What I saw wasn't violence. I saw artistry. I saw years of dedication and training channeled into something beautiful. Then why does everyone else see a threat? Keiko asked. Because they're not really seeing you, Mr. Navarro replied. They're seeing their own fears, their own insecurities, their own understanding of what power looks like. Brianna Ellis built her reputation on social manipulation and emotional terrorism. When she encountered someone whose power came from internal discipline rather than external control, it threatened everything. She thought she knew about how strength works. That evening, Keiko sat in her bedroom staring at her phone as her grandfather's contact information glowed on the screen. She had been avoiding calling him since the video leak, partly out of shame and partly out of fear that he would be disappointed in how she had let his teachings be twisted into something ugly. Finally she gathered the courage to dial. Oh, Jason, she said when his familiar voice answered. I think I've dishonored everything you taught me. The whole school knows about my training now, and they're using it to make me look like a monster. Keiko Tanaka was quiet for a long moment before responding. Keiko-chan, tell me something. When you helped that boy in the library, what technique did you use? I didn't use any technique, Keiko said, confused. I just recorded them with my phone until they went away. Exactly, her grandfather said with warmth in his voice. You found a way to protect someone without causing harm. You used your presence, your awareness, your courage, but not your fists. That is the highest expression of martial arts, not the ability to break boards or win tournaments, but the wisdom to know when strength should be hidden and when it should be revealed. But now everyone thinks I'm dangerous. Good, Yuki said, surprising her. Let them think that for now fear can be a teacher. If it leads to respect, but remember, Keiko-chan, the mountain does not explain itself to the wind. It simply endures, and eventually the wind learns to flow around it rather than through it. As Keiko hung up the phone, she felt something shifting. Inside her, the shame and embarrassment that had consumed her since the video leak were beginning to transform into something else, something that felt like the calm focus she had learned to cultivate before stepping into the ring. Tomorrow she would return to school not as the apologetic victim trying to disappear, but as someone who was finally ready to stop running from who she really was. The question wasn't whether she was dangerous. The question was whether anyone at Eastbrook High was prepared for what happened when the mountain breaker finally decided to stand her ground. The harassment escalated the following week in ways that Keiko hadn't anticipated but probably should have expected, given Brianna Ellis's talent for psychological warfare and her apparent need to completely destroy any perceived threat to her social dominance. It was inevitable that the video leak would be just the opening move in a much larger campaign of intimidation. It started with the photos. Someone had been taking pictures of Keiko during her most vulnerable moments, changing clothes after gym class, walking alone to her car, sitting by herself during lunch. The images weren't explicit, but they were invasive, capturing her in moments when she thought she was unobserved. The photos appeared on anonymous social media accounts, with captions that ranged from mocking to genuinely threatening. Local Psycho, caught off guard, read one caption beneath a photo of Keiko looking tired and disheveled after a particularly difficult calculus test. Wonder what she's planning behind those dead eyes. Accompanied another image of her eating lunch alone. The message was clear: Keiko was being watched, judged, found wanting, and turned into entertainment for an audience that had decided she deserved whatever happened to her. The worst part wasn't the photos themselves, but what they represented. Someone was following her, documenting her daily routine, learning her patterns and vulnerabilities. Keiko found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, checking reflections in windows, scanning crowds for the hidden photographer who had turned her life into a surveillance operation. Tyler Cross was furious when he discovered the photo campaign. "This has gone way beyond cyberbullying," he told Keiko, as they sat in the empty photography lab after school. "This is stalking, harassment, and possibly criminal intimidation. We need to report this to the police and tell them." "What?" Keiko replied, her voice flat with exhaustion. "That someone took pictures of me in public spaces, that mean girls at school are being mean. I'm sure that's exactly what busy police officers want to deal with. This isn't just mean girl behavior," Tyler insisted. "This is systematic psychological abuse designed to isolate you and make you feel unsafe in your own school, and it's working." He was right, and Keiko knew it. The constant surveillance, the whispered threats, the way students now avoided her not just out of fear but out of active disgust was wearing her down in ways that physical opponents never had. In the dojo she had faced competitors who wanted to defeat her, but they respected her skill and fought with honor what she was experiencing. At Eastbrook High was something different, something that felt designed not just to beat her but to erase her completely. That night, as Keiko lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she made a decision that would have shocked her grandfather and terrified her mother. She was going to start training again, not the casual stretching and form practice she had maintained since moving to Illinois, but the intense disciplined preparation that had made her a champion. At 5:30 the next morning, Keiko was in her backyard moving through cataforms that she hadn't practiced in months. The familiar sequence of movements felt like coming home to herself. Each punch, each kick, each perfectly balanced stance reminded her body of what it was capable of, reminded her mind of the focus and determination that had carried her through 3 years of championship competition. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, happened to be in her garden early that morning and stopped to watch the display of martial arts mastery playing out in the suburban dawn. What she witnessed was unlike anything she had seen outside of professional demonstrations. The 17-year-old girl moved with a fluidity and power that seemed to defy physics. her techniques flowing seamlessly. From defense to attack and back again, with the kind of precision that only came from thousands of hours of practice. As Keiko finished her training session, she noticed Mrs. Chun watching and felt a moment of panic. Would her neighbor be afraid of her now? Would words spread through the community that the new family had brought a dangerous element into their quiet neighborhood? But Mrs. Chun simply smiled and called out, "Beautiful forms, dear. Your grandfather must be very proud." The comment stayed with Keiko throughout the day as she navigated another series of hostile stares and whispered conversations. At lunch, Marcus Lee approached her table with a newspaper in his hands. "Have you seen this?" he asked, sliding the paper across to her. Tyler Cross had published another article, this time with his actual byline. Instead of hiding behind anonymity, the headline read, "The Anatomy of a Witch Hunt: How Fear and Jealousy Create Monsters Where None Exist." The article was a detailed analysis of the harassment campaign being waged against Keiko, complete with screenshots of the threatening social media post, documentation of the privacy violations, and interviews with students who had witnessed the escalating intimidation. But what made the article truly powerful was Tyler's personal account of watching Keiko help Marcus in the library. "I have seen this student's character tested under pressure," Tyler had written. "I have watched her choose restraint when she could have chosen violence, choose protection when she could have chosen self-preservation, choose dignity when she could have chosen revenge. If this is what dangerous looks like, then perhaps we need to reconsider our definition of the word." The article was shared hundreds of times within hours of publication, creating the first real pushback against Brianna's narrative. Students who had remained silent during the initial video leak began commenting in support of Keiko. Parents who had heard about the harassment from their children started asking questions about the school's anti-bullying policies. Even some teachers began expressing concern about the toxic environment that had been allowed to develop. But Brianna Ellis wasn't finished, and Keiko was about to learn that a cornered social predator could be even more dangerous than an aggressive one. That afternoon, as Keiko was walking to her car after school, she found a group of students waiting for her in the parking lot. Brianna stood at the center of the group, flanked by her usual crew, but also including several students Keiko didn't recognize. The crowd was large enough to draw attention, but small enough to maintain plausible deniability if any adults asked questions. Well, Brianna called out, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "If it isn't our resident ninja princess, I think it's time we had a little chat about how things work around here." Keiko stopped walking but didn't respond. She could feel her training kicking and automatically assessing distances, calculating angles, identifying potential threats and escape routes. But she could also hear her grandfather's voice reminding her that the strongest warrior was often the one who never had to fight. "You see," Brianna continued, stepping closer, "we have a problem. You've been going around acting like you're some kind of victim, like we're the bad guys for exposing what you really are. But I think you've got it backwards. I think you're the threat here, and we're just protecting ourselves." The crowd had grown larger now, with students emerging from the school building to see what was happening. Keiko realized that this was exactly what Brianna wanted: a public confrontation that would either humiliate her further or provoke her into the kind of violent response that would confirm everyone's worst fears about her. "I don't want any trouble," Keiko said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "I just want to finish school and move on with my life." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Brianna replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "See, you don't get to decide when this is over. You brought violence and deception into our school, and now you have to face the consequences." In the crowd, Keiko could see Tyler Cross frantically recording the confrontation with his phone, while Marcus Lee stood nearby looking terrified, but determined to stay and witness whatever was about to happen. She could also see several adults in the distance, but none of them seemed inclined to intervene in what they probably saw as typical teenage drama. Brianna took another step closer, now standing close enough that only Keiko could hear her next words. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer schools again, run away. Like you obviously did from wherever you came from, or I'm going to make sure that what's happened this week looks like a friendly welcome compared to what comes next. For a moment, Keiko felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every tournament match. Her body tensed, her breathing deepened, and every instinct honed by years of competition urged her to respond to this challenge the way she had been trained to respond to threats. But then she heard something else, her grandfather's voice reminding her that true strength wasn't about winning fights. It was about choosing which battles were worth fighting. "I'll think about it," Keiko said quietly, then turned and walked to her car, leaving Brianna and her crowd standing in the parking lot. As she drove home, Keiko realized that her time for hiding was over. One way or another, the confrontation that had been building since her first day at Eastbrook High was going to reach its conclusion very soon. The only question was whether she would meet it as a victim trying to disappear, or as the mountain breaker who had earned her name by refusing to be moved by anything the world could throw at her. That night she called her grandfather one more time. "Oh, Jason," she said, "I think it's time to stop running." "Good," Keiko Tanaka replied. "Running only works if you have somewhere safe to go, but sometimes the safest place is exactly where you are when you finally decide to make your stand." The next morning brought an unseasonably warm October day that felt more like summer than fall, and with it came the kind of energy that seemed to crackle through Eastbrook High's hallways like electricity before a storm. Students clustered in small groups, exchanging glances and whispered conversations that died abruptly whenever a teacher passed by. Everyone knew that something was building between Keiko Tanaka and Brianna Ellis's crew. Everyone could feel the tension that had been escalating for weeks finally approaching its breaking point. Keiko arrived at school that morning feeling different than she had since the video leak. There was a calmness about her movements, a certainty in her posture that reminded anyone paying close attention of the competitor they had seen in that tournament footage. She had spent the night thinking about her grandfather's words about making a stand and had come to a decision that would surprise everyone, including herself. During second period chemistry class, a note was passed to Keiko from an unknown source. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was crystal clear. "Cafeteria today lunchtime. Let's settle this once and for all. Everyone will be watching, so don't embarrass yourself any more than you already have." Keiko read the note twice, then calmly folded it and slipped it into her backpack. She had been expecting this moment since yesterday's parking lot confrontation had ended without resolution. Brianna Ellis was not the type of person who could tolerate an unfinished power play, and the social pressure that had been building around their conflict needed some kind of dramatic climax to satisfy the bloodthirsty audience that high school drama always seemed to attract. The word spread through the school with the kind of supernatural speed that only teenage gossip networks could achieve. By third period, everyone knew that something was going to happen at lunch. By fourth period, students were already taking sides and making predictions about how the confrontation would unfold. Some expected Keiko to back down and transfer schools, as Brianna had demanded. Others anticipated an explosive display of the martial arts skills they had seen in the leaked video. A few hoped that cooler heads would prevail and the conflict would be resolved through words rather than violence. Tyler Cross found Keiko at her locker between classes, his face creased with concern. "You don't have to do this," he said urgently. "We can report the harassment to the administration. We can get your parents involved. We can find another way to handle this that doesn't put you in danger." "I'm not in danger, Tyler," Keiko replied as she organized her books with the same methodical precision she had once used to arrange her tournament gear. "I've been in danger since the day I arrived here and tried to pretend I was someone else. The danger isn't in facing this situation. The danger is in continuing to run from it." "But what if she's setting you up? What if this isn't just about social status? What if she's trying to provoke you into doing something that will get you arrested or expelled?" Keiko paused in her locker organization and looked at Tyler directly. "Then I guess we'll find out what kind of person I really am, won't we, Marcus?" Lee appeared at Keiko's other side looking nervous but determined. "I'm going to be there," he announced. "I know. I can't help if things get physical, but I want to witness. Whatever happens, I want to make sure that if someone tries to twist the story later, there's at least one person who saw the truth." The morning classes passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Teachers tried to maintain normal lessons, but the undercurrent of excitement and tension was impossible to ignore. Even adults who were supposed to be focused on education found themselves stealing glances at Keiko, wondering what would happen when the lunch bell rang at 11:45. Keiko excused herself from a P.English and walked to the bathroom where she splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. The girl staring back at her was no longer the frightened transfer student who had arrived at Eastbrook High 7 weeks earlier. This was someone who had remembered what it felt like to be strong, not with the borrowed confidence of social status or the false power of manipulation, but with the deep, unshakable strength that came from years of discipline and self-knowledge. The cafeteria was more crowded than usual when Keiko entered at exactly 12:15. Students had arranged themselves in loose clusters that provided clear sight lines to the center of the room where several tables had been mysteriously moved aside to create an open space. Conversations died as she walked through the room, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors with a rhythm that reminded her of walking into tournament venues where hundreds of spectators waited to see what she was capable of. Brianna Ellis was holding court at her usual table, surrounded by her core group of followers, but also flanked by several larger students that Keiko didn't recognize. The setup was clearly designed for intimidation, a show of force that would make any reasonable person reconsider their options and choose retreat over confrontation. But as Keiko approached the center of the impromptu arena, she felt the familiar pre-competition calm settling over her, the same mental state that had carried her through 3 years of championship tournaments when facing opponents who were older, stronger, more experienced, and highly motivated to defeat her. This wasn't about anger or revenge or even justice. This was about finally answering the question that had been hanging over Eastbrook High since the day her video leaked. Who was Keiko Tanaka really? Well, look who decided to show up. Brianna called out, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. "I was starting to think you had finally come to your senses and transferred to a school more suited to your special needs." The crowd laughed nervously, unsure whether they were witnessing the beginning of a verbal sparring match or something more serious. Keiko walked to the center of the open space and stood quietly waiting for Brianna to finish her performance. "See, here's the thing about people like you," Brianna continued, standing up from her table and beginning to pace like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You think that just because you can throw some punches and break some boards, you're better than everyone else. You think that gives you the right to come into our school and disrupt our community and threaten our safety." "Haven't threatened anyone," Keiko said calmly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I haven't disrupted anything, and I certainly haven't tried to claim I'm better than anyone else. I've tried to mind my own business, finish my education, and avoid exactly this kind of situation." "Oh, please," Brianna scoffed. "You think we're all stupid. You think we can't see what you're really doing. Walking around with that fake, humble act, pretending to be some kind of victim while secretly planning who knows what kind of violence. The way you helped that loser Marcus was just you testing your power, seeing how far you could push before someone pushed back." The accusation was so twisted, so far from the reality of what had happened, that Keiko felt a flash of genuine anger for the first time since the harassment began. But the anger didn't cloud her judgment. Instead, it clarified her purpose and strengthened her resolve. "You want to know what I'm really planning," Keiko said, her voice still calm, but carrying a new edge that made several students in the crowd shift nervously. "I'm planning to graduate. I'm planning to go to college. I'm planning to become the kind of person who uses her strength to protect people who can't protect themselves, instead of using social media to destroy people who never hurt anyone." "Big words from someone who's about to run away again," Brianna replied. "Because that's what you did before, isn't it? You came here from somewhere else because you couldn't handle the consequences of your violent behavior somewhere else. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the background noise of food service and cleaning had stopped as every person in the room focused on the confrontation unfolding before them. Keiko realized that this was her moment, not just to defend herself, but to finally tell her own story in her own words. "You want to know why I left Los Angeles?" Keiko said, her voice growing stronger. "I left because 3 gang-affiliated students cornered a girl in my school's parking lot, and I made the choice to intervene. I left because when they turned their attention to me, I defended myself and sent all 3 of them to the hospital. I left because the video of that fight made me local news, and I realized that being known for violence, even justified violence, was not the legacy I wanted to build." The crowd stirred at this revelation, murmurs of surprise and speculation rippling through the assembled students. Brianna's confident expression flickered for just a moment as she realized that her victim narrative was more complicated than she had anticipated. "So you see," Keiko continued, "I didn't come here to threaten anyone. I came here to escape the consequences of being exactly what you're trying to provoke me into being again. But I've learned something over the past few weeks. I've learned that running from who you are doesn't work, because eventually you end up in the same situation, just in a different location." She paused, looking around the cafeteria at the faces of her classmates, some fearful, some fascinated, some beginning to show the first glimmers of understanding. "So here's what's going to happen," Keiko said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded respect in championship tournaments. "I'm not going to transfer schools. I'm not going to hide from what I am, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else define my story for me. But I'm also not going to give you the satisfaction of turning me into the monster you need me to be to justify your behavior." Brianna's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she realized that her carefully orchestrated public humiliation was turning into something else entirely. "You think you can just give some little speech and everyone's going to forget what you really are? You think you can intimidate us with your threats about gang fights and hospital visits?" "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," Keiko replied. "I'm trying to give you a choice. You can continue this harassment campaign and discover what happens when you finally push someone too far. Or you can accept that I'm not going anywhere and find a way to coexist peacefully with someone who refuses to be your victim." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Marcus Lee was applauding from his position near the windows, his face shining with admiration and pride. Tyler Cross joined in, followed by several other students, until nearly half the cafeteria was acknowledging Keiko's courage in standing up for herself. But Brianna Ellis was not finished, and what she said next would ensure that the conflict between them could only end one way. "You know what I think," Brianna said, her voice rising to carry over the applause. "I think you're still just a scared little girl, hiding behind big words and ancient history. I think when it comes down to it, you're too weak to back up all that tough talk with actual action." She stepped closer to Keiko until they were standing face to face in the center of the cafeteria's impromptu arena. "So here's my choice for you. Show us what you really are right here, right now, or spend the rest of your senior year being known as the fake tough girl who talks big but runs away when someone calls her bluff." The challenge hung in the air between them as 300 students held their breath, waiting to see which version of Keiko Tanaka would emerge from this moment. The frightened transfer student who had spent weeks trying to disappear, or the mountain breaker who had earned her name by refusing to be moved by anything the world could throw at her. Keiko looked around the cafeteria one more time, seeing the eager faces, the phone cameras already recording the mix of fear and excitement that always preceded violence. Then she smiled, the same calm, confident expression she had worn before every tournament victory, and said the words that would change everything. "After school, parking lot behind the gym, just you and me and anyone brave enough to watch." The roar that erupted from the cafeteria crowd could be heard throughout the entire school building as word spread of the arranged confrontation. Eastbrook High buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt since the homecoming football game 3 weeks earlier. But this wasn't about school spirit or team loyalty. This was about something much more primal and much more dangerous. The mountain breaker had finally agreed to fight. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot behind Eastbrook High's gymnasium as students gathered in clusters that had formed naturally around the edges of what everyone understood would serve as an impromptu arena. Word of the confrontation had spread through every classroom, every hallway, and every social media platform connected to the school, creating an audience that represented nearly a quarter of the entire student body. Keiko arrived at exactly 3:30, wearing the same jeans and hoodie she had worn to school that morning. But something about her presence had fundamentally changed. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had spent years walking into competition venues where hundreds of spectators waited to judge her performance. Her breathing was controlled, her posture relaxed yet alert, and her expression carried the same calm focus that had intimidated opponents across 3 years of championship tournaments. Tyler Cross was already positioned near the gymnasium wall, his camera ready, but his face creased with worry. He had spent the last 2 hours trying to convince Keiko to reconsider, trying to find adults who would intervene, trying to document evidence that could be used to stop what he was certain would end badly for everyone involved. But Keiko had been unmoved by his arguments, responding to his concerns with the same quiet certainty that had marked her decision to finally stop running from confrontation. Marcus Lee stood nearby, flanked by several other students who had become unofficial supporters of Keiko over the past few weeks. They formed a small but vocal group that had grown tired of watching Brianna Ellis manipulate social dynamics through fear and intimidation. Their presence provided a counterbalance to the larger crowd that had gathered primarily for entertainment value, treating the impending fight like a sporting event rather than a serious conflict between two students. Brianna Ellis made her entrance 15 minutes later, accompanied by her usual entourage, but also including several students that Keiko didn't recognize. The group moved with the swagger of people who had never doubted their own power, their own right to determine how conflicts would be resolved, and their own immunity from serious consequences. Brianna had changed into workout clothes and athletic shoes, suggesting that she took the physical challenge more seriously than her casual dismissal of Keiko's abilities might have indicated. But it was the person walking slightly behind Brianna's main group that caught Keiko's attention and triggered the first real surge of adrenaline she had felt since accepting the challenge. Trina Walsh was a senior who had transferred to Eastbrook High 2 years earlier with a reputation for street fighting that preceded her arrival. She was taller than Keiko, more muscular, and carried herself with the kind of casual aggression that suggested she enjoyed physical confrontation in ways that trained martial artists never did. The crowd stirred as recognition rippled through the assembled students. Everyone knew that Brianna Ellis herself had never been in a real fight, had built her reputation on social manipulation rather than physical intimidation. The presence of Trina Walsh suggested that this confrontation was about to take a turn that even the most bloodthirsty spectators hadn't anticipated. Well, Brianna called out as her group approached the center of the impromptu arena. "Look who actually showed up. I was starting to think you had finally come to your senses and realized that some challenges are better left unanswered." Keiko didn't respond immediately, instead taking a moment to assess the situation with the same methodical approach she had learned from years of tournament competition. She noted the positioning of Brianna's supporters, the distance to potential exits, the composition of the crowd, and most importantly, the way Trina Walsh was stretching and warming up like someone preparing for serious physical activity. "I said I would be here," Keiko replied calmly, "but I notice you brought some backup. Is that because you're not confident in your ability to handle this yourself?" The crowd murmured appreciatively at the verbal jab, and Brianna's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I brought witnesses," she said. "People who will make sure that whatever happens here gets properly documented so everyone can see exactly what kind of person you really are." Actually, Trina Walsh stepped forward, cracking her knuckles with theatrical flair. Brianna thought this whole thing was getting a little too personal, so she asked me to handle the physical side of things while she focuses on the social media documentation. Nothing personal against you, new girl, but some lessons are better taught by people who specialize in teaching them. The crowd erupted in excited chatter as students realized they were about to witness something far more serious than a typical high school argument. Keiko felt her training kick and automatically her awareness expanding to take in every detail of her opponent's stance, movement patterns, and potential weaknesses, but she also felt something else, a deep disappointment that Brianna had chosen to escalate the conflict in a way that removed any possibility of resolution through words or mutual understanding. So this is how you handle your own challenges, Keiko said, looking directly at Brianna. You get someone else to fight your battles while you record the results for social media clout. I get results, Brianna replied. However, I need to get them. Tyler Cross stepped forward from his position near the wall, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. This is insane. You're talking about assault in front of 300 witnesses with multiple people recording everything. Do you realize that this could destroy all of your futures? Only if someone gets seriously hurt, Trina Walsh said with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. And I'm very good at teaching lessons without causing permanent damage. The threat hung in the air as Keiko realized that she was facing a decision that would define not just her remaining time at Eastbrook High, but her understanding of who she was and what her years of training had prepared her for. She could walk away, accept social humiliation, but avoid physical confrontation and maintain the moral high ground that her grandfather had always emphasized. Or she could engage with an opponent who clearly had no interest in the honor, respect, and mutual growth that characterized true martial arts competition. Last chance to walk away, new girl, Trina said as she began moving in a slow circle around Keiko. I've got nothing against you personally, but I've got a reputation to maintain, and Brianna's got information I need her to keep private, so this is just business, nothing more. Keiko closed her eyes for a moment and heard her grandfather's voice echoing across the years of training. Karate begins and ends with respect, but when respect is impossible, strength becomes necessary. She opened her eyes and settled into a stance that Tyler Cross would later describe as looking like a mountain preparing to meet an avalanche. I understand, Keiko said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had commanded attention in the cafeteria. But before we begin, I want everyone here to understand something. This isn't a fight, this is a demonstration, Trina. Walsh laughed and launched herself forward with a wild swing aimed at Keiko's head. It was the kind of aggressive opening that worked well in street fights where intimidation and raw power often determined outcomes. But it was also exactly the kind of telegraphed, undisciplined attack that Keiko had been trained to counter since childhood. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but would be replayed in slow motion on dozens of phone cameras for months to come. Keiko stepped slightly to her left, redirecting Trina's momentum while simultaneously applying pressure to a nerve cluster just below her opponent's elbow. The result was immediate and dramatic. Trina's entire right arm went numb, causing her to stumble forward off balance and vulnerable. Instead of following up with a devastating counterattack, Keiko simply stepped aside and allowed Trina to crash into the ground. When her opponent scrambled to her feet, shaking, feeling back into her arm and preparing to charge again, Keiko was standing exactly where she had started, hands at her sides, breathing normally and wearing the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. Are you ready to continue? Keiko asked politely. Or would you like to discuss a different approach to resolving this situation? The crowd had gone completely silent, shocked by the clinical efficiency with which Keiko had neutralized what had appeared to be a serious physical threat. Trina Walsh had built her reputation on intimidating opponents before fights even began, but she was facing someone who seemed completely unimpressed by aggressive posturing and utterly confident in her ability to handle whatever violence might be directed toward her. What the hell did you just do to my arm? Trina demanded, flexing her fingers and rolling her shoulder to restore. Full movement. I demonstrated control, Keiko replied. I could have broken your elbow, dislocated your shoulder, or knocked you unconscious, but I chose to simply disable your attack and give you an opportunity to reconsider your approach. Tyler. Cross was recording everything, his camera capturing not just the physical techniques but the stark contrast between Keiko's composed professionalism and the chaotic aggression of her opponents. He realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. In his experience, a trained martial artist choosing restraint and precision over domination and destruction. This is what real strength looks like, Keiko called out, addressing the entire crowd rather than just her immediate opponents. This is what 3 years of championship training teaches you. Not how to hurt people, but how to protect yourself and others without causing unnecessary harm. But Trina Walsh was not interested in lessons about restraint and professional martial arts. She was embarrassed, angry, and determined to salvage her reputation through sheer persistence, ignoring the nervous murmurs from the crowd. She charged again, this time attempting a tackle that would bring the fight to the ground where her size advantage might prove decisive. Keiko's response was swift, precise, and absolutely devastating. She stepped into Trina's charge, redirected her momentum with a hip toss that sent her opponent flying through the air, and deposited her on the asphalt with an impact that could be heard clearly throughout the parking lot. This time Trina Walsh did not get up immediately, instead lying motionless while Keiko knelt beside her, checking for serious injuries with the same professional concern that tournament medical staff had always shown for defeated competitors. She's fine, Keiko announced, standing up and addressing the shocked crowd. Probably a mild concussion, possibly some bruised ribs, but nothing that requires emergency medical attention. Should be uncomfortable for a few days, but there won't be any permanent damage. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of slow, deliberate applause. Marcus Lee was clapping again, joined quickly by Tyler Cross, and then by dozens of other students who had witnessed something they had never seen before: a display of martial arts skill that prioritized control over destruction, precision over brutality, and protection over domination. Brianna Ellis stood frozen in the center of her group, her phone still recording, but her expression showing none of the triumph she had expected to capture. Instead, she was staring at someone who had just demonstrated exactly why she had been so threatened by Keiko's presence since the first day of school. The mountain breaker had finally shown Eastbrook High what she was capable of, and it was nothing like what anyone had expected. The aftermath of the parking lot confrontation created a seismic shift in the social dynamics of Eastbrook High that no one could have predicted. Within hours of Trina Walsh's humiliating defeat, the story had taken on a life of its own, spreading through social media networks far beyond the school's immediate community. Tyler Cross's video of the encounter had been shared thousands of times, with commentary ranging from admiration for Keiko's restraint to shock at the clinical efficiency with which she had neutralized a much larger opponent. But it was what happened in the hours immediately following the fight that would ultimately determine how the conflict between Keiko Tanaka and Brianna Ellis would be resolved. Principal Martinez had arrived at the school within 30 minutes of receiving reports about the confrontation, followed closely by several police officers and paramedics who examined Trina Walsh before determining that her injuries were minor and didn't require hospitalization. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Principal Martinez had been dealing with bullying situations for 15 years, but the systematic harassment campaign that had been waged against Keiko represented something more sophisticated and potentially criminal than typical teenage conflict. He interviewed dozens of witnesses, reviewed hours of social media content, and discovered a digital trail that painted a clear picture of cyberbullying, privacy violations, and organized intimidation. Samira Patel had been wrestling with guilt about her role in the harassment campaign since the day she had helped Brianna hack Keiko's iCloud account. The video leak had been presented to her as harmless social investigation designed to protect their friend group from a potential threat, but watching the systematic destruction of another. Students' reputation and safety had gradually worn away her loyalty to Brianna's version of friendship. The morning after the parking lot confrontation, Samira made a decision that would change everything. She walked into Principal Martinez's office carrying a folder full of evidence that documented the entire harassment campaign from its planning stages through its execution. Screenshots of group chats where Brianna had coordinated the photo surveillance, audio recordings of conversations where the popular girl had bragged about destroying the karate freak, digital evidence of the iCloud hack and the subsequent distribution of stolen personal content. "I can't be part of this anymore," Samira told Principal Martinez as she handed over the evidence. "I thought we were just protecting ourselves from someone who might be dangerous, but we became the dangerous ones, and I can't live with what we did to her." The evidence Samira provided was damning enough to result in immediate suspensions for Brianna Ellis and several members of her inner circle. The cyberbullying alone constituted multiple criminal violations, but the organized harassment campaign elevated the situation to something that would require involvement from law enforcement and potentially the district attorney's office. Tyler Cross published a follow-up article that afternoon titled, "The Anatomy of Justice: How Truth Eventually Surfaces When Courage Confronts Corruption." The piece included excerpts from Samira's evidence interviews with students who had witnessed the harassment and a detailed timeline that showed how Brianna's fear of losing social dominance had evolved into a systematic attempt to destroy another student's life. But what made the article truly powerful was Tyler's analysis of what Keiko's response had demonstrated about the difference between genuine strength and manufactured power. "Yesterday we witnessed something extraordinary," Tyler wrote. "A young woman who had every justification for using devastating force against her tormentors chose instead to demonstrate that real power comes from restraint, real strength comes from protecting others, and real victory comes from maintaining your principles, even when facing people who have abandoned theirs." The response to Tyler's article was immediate and overwhelming. Students who had remained silent during the harassment campaign began sharing their own stories of intimidation and social manipulation. Parents who had heard fragments of the story from their children started demanding meetings with school administrators. Teachers who had witnessed toxic social dynamics but felt powerless to intervene began speaking up about the need for systemic changes to address cyberbullying and peer harassment. Mr. Navarro found Keiko in his classroom after school, reading quietly while the chaos of investigations and interviews continued around her. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into the desk beside her. "I keep thinking about my grandfather," Keiko replied. "He always taught me that the goal of martial arts training isn't to become someone who can win fights. It's to become someone who doesn't need to fight, because other people respect your strength enough to choose peaceful solutions." "And do you think that's what happened yesterday?" Keiko considered the question carefully. "I think what happened yesterday was that I finally stopped being afraid of who I am. I stopped trying to hide my training, my background, my capabilities, and I showed everyone, including myself, that strength doesn't have to mean violence." The video of your confrontation with Trina has been viewed over 50,000 times, Mr. Navarro said. "The comments are overwhelmingly positive. People are calling you a role model for how to handle bullying situations without escalating to unnecessary violence." "That's not why I did it," Keiko said. "I didn't fight back to become famous or to prove a point. I did it because someone needed to show Brianna Ellis that there are consequences for trying to destroy other people's lives, and someone needed to show Trina Walsh that intimidation doesn't work against people who understand their own strength." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the classroom door. Principal Martinez entered, followed by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Chun from the county's cybercrime unit. "Miss Tanaka, we need to discuss the harassment campaign that was directed against you over the past several weeks. We have evidence of multiple criminal violations, and we need your cooperation to determine how to proceed with potential charges." The Investigation that followed revealed the full scope of what Brianna Ellis and her crew had orchestrated. iCloud hack constituted unauthorized access to personal digital accounts. The photo surveillance represented stalking and invasion of privacy. The systematic distribution of stolen content qualified as cyberbullying under state law, and the organized campaign to isolate and intimidate Keiko fell under federal guidelines for hate crime prosecution. But when Detective Chun asked Keiko what kind of justice she wanted to pursue, the answer surprised everyone in the room. "I want them to understand what they did," Keiko said. "I want them to face consequences that will prevent them from doing this to other students in the future. But I don't want to destroy their lives the way they tried to destroy mine. I want them to learn from this experience and become better people." The restorative justice approach that Principal Martinez implemented, based on Keiko's recommendations, became a model that other schools would later adopt. Brianna Ellis was suspended for the remainder of the semester, required to attend counseling sessions focused on empathy and healthy relationship dynamics, and mandated to complete 200 hours of community service working with anti-bullying organizations. Her college applications would include documentation of the harassment campaign and its resolution, more importantly for the long-term health of Eastbrook High's social environment. The investigation had exposed the toxic dynamics that had allowed systematic bullying to flourish. Unchecked students, who had previously felt powerless to challenge popular students, began speaking up about inappropriate behavior. Teachers received training on recognizing and addressing cyberbullying, and the administration implemented new policies designed to protect vulnerable students from the kind of orchestrated harassment that Keiko had endured. 3 days after the parking lot confrontation, Keiko received a handwritten letter that had been slipped into her locker. The note was from Trina Walsh, who was recovering from her injuries, but had apparently been doing serious thinking about the encounter. "I want you to know that I respect what you did," Trina had written. "You could have seriously hurt me. You had every right to seriously hurt me, but you chose not to. I've been fighting people since middle school, and nobody has ever shown me that kind of control or that kind of mercy. I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to try to be better because of it." That evening, Keiko called her grandfather in Los Angeles to tell him about everything that had happened, the harassment campaign, the investigation, the confrontation, and its aftermath. Keiko Tanaka listened without interruption until she had finished her account. "Keiko-chan," he said finally, "do you remember what I told you about the mountain and the wind? You said the mountain endures because it knows its own foundation. Yes, but there is more to that lesson. The mountain also teaches the wind how to flow around obstacles instead of trying to destroy them. You have shown your classmates what true strength looks like, and now they will have to decide whether they want to learn from your example or continue fighting against forces they cannot defeat." As Keiko hung up the phone, she realized that her time of hiding was finally over. She had found her place at Eastbrook High, not as the invisible transfer student she had tried to become, but as someone who could use her unique experiences and abilities to make her community stronger and safer for everyone. The mountain breaker had finally learned that sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to teach others how to protect each other. The transformation of Eastbrook High's social climate didn't happen overnight, but it began with a simple announcement that appeared on the morning announcements 3 weeks after the parking lot confrontation. Students interested in learning about martial arts philosophy, conflict resolution, and practical self-defense are invited to attend an informational meeting for a new extracurricular club. Thursday after school in the gymnasium, Keiko had spent those 3 weeks working with Mr. Navarro, Principal Martinez, and her mother to develop a proposal for what she initially called the Peaceful Warrior Club, but which eventually became known simply as the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club. Concept was straightforward: provide students with practical tools for avoiding and de-escalating conflicts while also teaching basic physical techniques that could be used for protection when avoidance was impossible. The response to the announcement surprised everyone, including Keiko herself. When Thursday afternoon arrived, more than 40 students gathered in the gymnasium, representing every social group and academic level in the school. Athletes who had grown tired of the toxic masculinity that often dominated sports culture, academic achievers who wanted to build confidence in social situations, arts, students who were interested in the discipline and focused that martial arts training could provide, even several students who had been part of Brianna Ellis's social circle appeared curious about what Keiko might have to offer. Tyler Cross was there with his camera documenting what he suspected would become an important part of Eastbrook High's evolution. Marcus Lee had helped Keiko prepare presentation materials and had volunteered to serve as the club's first treasurer. And Coach Ramirez, the head of the physical education department, had agreed to serve as faculty advisor after reviewing Keiko's credentials and speaking with her grandfather via video call. "I want to start by addressing something that I know is on everyone's mind," Keiko began as the assembled students settled into a circle on the gymnasium floor. "This club is not about learning how to fight. This is not about becoming tougher or more aggressive or more capable of intimidating other people. This is about developing the kind of internal strength that makes fighting unnecessary." She paused, looking around the circle at faces that showed everything from skepticism to genuine interest to barely concealed excitement. "My grandfather has been teaching martial arts for 40 years, and the first thing he tells every new student is that karate begins and ends with respect. Respect for your training partners, respect for your opponents, respect for the techniques you're learning, and most importantly, respect for the responsibility that comes with having the ability to defend yourself and others." A sophomore named Jessica raised her hand. "But what about when respect doesn't work? What about when someone is determined to hurt you and talking doesn't make them stop?" "That's exactly the right question," Keiko replied. "And the answer is that we learn physical techniques as a last resort. Not as a first option. We learn them so that we have choices in dangerous situations instead of being helpless. But we also learn them within a framework that emphasizes de-escalation, protection rather than aggression, and using the minimum force necessary to resolve conflict safely." Over the next hour, Keiko led the group through basic awareness exercises designed to help students recognize potentially dangerous situations before they escalated into physical confrontations. She taught breathing techniques that could help manage anxiety and fear during stressful encounters, and she demonstrated simple defensive movements that could be used to create distance and seek help rather than to inflict damage on attackers. But what impressed the assembled students most was Keiko's emphasis on the philosophical aspects of martial arts training. "True martial arts is about developing your character," she explained. "It's about learning to remain calm under pressure, to make good decisions when you're afraid, to protect others even when it's difficult, and to use your strength in service of your principles rather than your emotions." Marcus Lee had prepared a presentation about the academic research supporting martial arts training for adolescent development. He shared studies showing that students who participated in traditional martial arts programs showed improved academic performance, better emotional regulation, stronger leadership skills, and decreased involvement in bullying behaviors, both as perpetrators and as victims. "What we're proposing isn't just a self-defense class," Marcus explained. "It's a comprehensive approach to developing the kind of mental and emotional strength that helps students succeed in all areas of their lives. The physical techniques are just one component of a much larger educational experience." Tyler Cross documented the entire meeting, capturing both the formal presentations and the informal conversations that developed as students began discussing their own experiences with conflict bullying and the desire to feel more confident in challenging social situations. Several students shared stories about times when they had wished they had the tools to stand up for themselves or others, but hadn't known how to intervene safely. By the end of the meeting, 37 students had signed up to participate in the club's weekly sessions, which would be held every Thursday after school, with additional weekend workshops scheduled monthly. Keiko had established partnerships with local martial arts, schools that would provide guest instructors for specialized techniques, and with conflict resolution organizations that would offer training in mediation and peer counseling. Skills, but perhaps the most significant development was the interest shown by several former members of Brianna Ellis's social circle. Samira Patel approached Keiko after most of the other students had left looking nervous, but determined. "I know. I don't have any right to ask this after everything that happened," she said, "but I was wondering if I could join the club. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of person I want to be, and I think I need to learn some of the things you're talking about." Keiko studied Samira's face, noting the genuine remorse and the fragile hope that her request might be accepted. "The club is open to any student who is serious about learning and growing," she replied. "But I need to know that you understand what that commitment means. This isn't about learning how to be tougher or more popular. This is about developing the kind of character that would never participate in the kind of harassment campaign that was directed against me." "I understand," Samira said, "and I want you to know that I'm seeing a counselor to help me understand why I went along with Brianna's behavior and how to make better choices in the future. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to become someone who would never do those things again." The conversation that followed became the foundation for one of the most important aspects of the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club: its emphasis on redemption and personal growth rather than punishment and exclusion. Keiko had learned from her grandfather that martial arts training was most effective when it brought together people from different backgrounds and experiences, creating opportunities for mutual learning and support. As the weeks passed, the club developed its own culture and traditions. Thursday afternoon sessions began with meditation and breathing exercises designed to help students transition from the stress of academic work to the focused calm required for effective training. Students practiced basic defensive techniques but spent equal time discussing ethical scenarios and role-playing conflict resolution strategies. The monthly weekend workshops became community events that attracted parents, teachers, and even some local law enforcement officers who were interested in learning about alternative approaches to violence prevention. Detective Chen began attending regularly and eventually developed a presentation about cyberbullying prevention that became part of the club's regular curriculum. Tyler Cross documented the club's growth and impact for a series of articles that were eventually picked up by regional newspapers and educational journals. His photography captured the transformation that occurred in students who had initially joined seeking physical confidence, but discovered something much more valuable: a sense of personal empowerment that came from understanding their own values and developing the courage to live according to those principles. 6 weeks after the club's formation, Keiko received a video call from her grandfather, who had been following the developments through Tyler's articles and social media posts. "Keiko-chan," Yuki Tanaka said with obvious pride in his voice, "you have done something that many martial artists never achieve. You have learned that the greatest victory is teaching others how to avoid the need for victory. I think I'm finally understanding what you meant about the mountain and the wind," Keiko replied. "The mountain doesn't fight the wind, it just shows the wind how to flow in ways that don't cause destruction. And now you are teaching your classmates how to be mountains," her grandfather said, "strong enough to endure whatever challenges they face, but wise enough to help others find peaceful paths around those challenges." As the semester progressed, the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club became one of the most popular and respected organizations at Eastbrook High. Students who had never spoken to each other before formed friendships based on shared commitment to personal growth and community service. The bullying incidents that had once been commonplace in the school's hallways became increasingly rare as more students developed the confidence to intervene safely when they witnessed inappropriate behavior. But perhaps the most important measure of the club's success was the change in Keiko herself. She had arrived at Eastbrook High as a frightened transfer student trying to hide from her own strength and abilities. She had evolved into someone who understood that true power came not from the ability to defeat others, but from the willingness to help others discover their own strength. The mountain breaker had finally learned that the most important battles are the ones you help others avoid fighting. The spring morning felt different as Keiko Tanaka walked through the hallways of Eastbrook High for what would be one of her final weeks as a student there. 6 months had passed since the parking lot confrontation that had changed everything, and the transformation of both the school and herself had been more profound than anyone could have imagined. The same corridors that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming now buzzed with a different kind of energy, conversations that focused on mutual support rather than social destruction, friendships that crossed traditional boundaries, and a general atmosphere of respect that had replaced the toxic competition that had once defined the school's social dynamics. Today was particularly significant because the school was hosting its first annual Student Leadership and Community Service Recognition Assembly, an event that had grown out of the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club's success and had expanded to celebrate students who had made positive contributions to the school's culture. The assembly had been planned by a committee that included representatives from every major student organization and had attracted attention from local media, educational researchers, and even state education officials who were interested in documenting Eastbrook High's transformation. Keiko had been selected to receive the inaugural Outstanding Leadership Award, recognizing her role in creating positive change within the school community. But what made the honor particularly meaningful was that the nomination had come from her fellow students, including several who had initially been part of Brianna Ellis's social circle and had participated in the harassment campaign before ultimately choosing a different path. As she entered the auditorium for the assembly, Keiko reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrifying first day when she had tried so desperately to remain invisible. The Philosophy and Self-Defense Club now had over 80 active members and had spawned similar programs at 3 other schools in the district. The conflict resolution training that had started as a weekly workshop had been incorporated into the school's official curriculum, and Marcus Lee had been hired as a peer mediation coordinator position that would continue into the following year. Tyler Cross had documented the school's transformation through a series of articles and photo essays that had been published in educational journals and had attracted the attention of college admissions officers across the country, his portfolio focusing on positive social change in high school communities had earned him early admission to Northwestern University's journalism program and a scholarship that would allow him to continue documenting youth leadership initiatives throughout his college years. But perhaps the most significant change had been in the relationships that had developed among students who had previously existed in completely separate social spheres. The artificial barriers that had once divided athletes from academics, artists from social media, influencers and popular students from everyone else had begun to dissolve as the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club created opportunities for authentic connection based on shared values rather than shared interests or social status. Mr. Navarro had then promoted to assistant principal, partly based on his innovative approaches to addressing bullying and conflict resolution. The restorative justice program that he had implemented following Keiko's recommendations had reduced disciplinary incidents by 60% and had become a model that other schools were adopting throughout the state. His mentorship had helped Keiko develop her own leadership skills and had prepared her for the next phase of her educational journey. The assembly began with presentations from various student organizations, showcasing projects that had contributed to the school's positive culture. The drama club had created anti-bullying skits that were performed at middle schools throughout the district. The debate team had developed workshops on ethical argumentation and respectful disagreement. The student council had implemented peer support programs that connected upperclassmen with underclassmen who were struggling with social integration. When Principal Martinez introduced Keiko to receive her leadership award, the applause that filled the auditorium represented something far more significant than typical recognition. Ceremony politeness, students, teachers, parents, and community members were acknowledging someone who had transformed her own trauma into a catalyst for positive change, who had chosen growth over revenge, and who had demonstrated that real strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. When Keiko Tanaka arrived at our school 7 months ago, Principal Martinez said, she brought with her not just exceptional academic credentials and remarkable athletic achievements, but also a quiet wisdom that our community desperately needed. She could have used her considerable abilities to dominate others, to seek revenge against those who wronged her, or to isolate herself from the challenges of high school social dynamics. Instead, she chose to share her knowledge to teach others about conflict resolution and personal empowerment, and to create opportunities for students to discover their own strength and potential. Keiko's acceptance speech had been carefully prepared, but as she stood at the podium looking out at an audience that included former tormentors, current friends, dedicated teachers, and proud family members, she felt compelled to speak from her heart rather than from her notes. 7 months ago, I came to this school trying to hide from who I was, she began. I thought that strength meant keeping my abilities secret, that wisdom meant avoiding confrontation, and that safety meant making myself invisible. But this community taught me that real strength comes from being authentic, even when it's difficult, that true wisdom means standing up for others even when it's scary, and that genuine safety comes from building relationships based on mutual respect and support. She paused, looking toward the section where the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club members were sitting there, faces reflecting the pride and growth that had characterized their shared journey. 6 weeks after the club's formation, Keiko received a video call from her grandfather, who had been following the developments through Tyler's articles and social media posts. Keiko-chan, Yuki Tanaka said with obvious pride in his voice, you have done something that many martial artists never achieve. You have learned that the greatest victory is teaching others how to avoid the need for victory. I think I'm finally understanding what you meant about the mountain and the wind, Keiko replied. The mountain doesn't fight the wind, it just shows the wind how to flow in ways that don't cause destruction. And now you are teaching your classmates how to be mountains, her grandfather said, strong enough to endure whatever challenges they face, but wise enough to help others find peaceful paths around those challenges. As the semester progressed, the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club became one of the most popular and respected organizations at Eastbrook High. Students who had never spoken to each other before formed friendships based on shared commitment to personal growth and community service. The bullying incidents that had once been commonplace in the school's hallways became increasingly rare as more students developed the confidence to intervene safely when they witnessed inappropriate behavior. But perhaps the most important measure of the club's success was the change in Keiko herself. She had arrived at Eastbrook High as a frightened transfer student trying to hide from her own strength and abilities. She had evolved into someone who understood that true power came not from the ability to defeat others, but from the willingness to help others discover their own strength. The mountain breaker had finally learned that the most important battles are the ones you help others avoid fighting. The spring morning felt different as Keiko Tanaka walked through the hallways of Eastbrook High for what would be one of her final weeks as a student there. 6 months had passed since the parking lot confrontation that had changed everything, and the transformation of both the school and herself had been more profound than anyone could have imagined. The same corridors that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming now buzzed with a different kind of energy, conversations that focused on mutual support rather than social destruction, friendships that crossed traditional boundaries, and a general atmosphere of respect that had replaced the toxic competition that had once defined the school's social dynamics. Today was particularly significant because the school was hosting its first annual Student Leadership and Community Service Recognition Assembly, an event that had grown out of the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club's success and had expanded to celebrate students who had made positive contributions to the school's culture. The assembly had been planned by a committee that included representatives from every major student organization and had attracted attention from local media, educational researchers, and even state education officials who were interested in documenting Eastbrook High's transformation. Keiko had been selected to receive the inaugural Outstanding Leadership Award, recognizing her role in creating positive change within the school community. But what made the honor particularly meaningful was that the nomination had come from her fellow students, including several who had initially been part of Brianna Ellis's social circle and had participated in the harassment campaign before ultimately choosing a different path. As she entered the auditorium for the assembly, Keiko reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrifying first day when she had tried so desperately to remain invisible. The Philosophy and Self-Defense Club now had over 80 active members and had spawned similar programs at 3 other schools in the district. The conflict resolution training that had started as a weekly workshop had been incorporated into the school's official curriculum, and Marcus Lee had been hired as a peer mediation coordinator position that would continue into the following year. Tyler Cross had documented the school's transformation through a series of articles and photo essays that had been published in educational journals and had attracted the attention of college admissions officers across the country, his portfolio focusing on positive social change in high school communities had earned him early admission to Northwestern University's journalism program and a scholarship that would allow him to continue documenting youth leadership initiatives throughout his college years. But perhaps the most significant change had been in the relationships that had developed among students who had previously existed in completely separate social spheres. The artificial barriers that had once divided athletes from academics, artists from social media, influencers and popular students from everyone else had begun to dissolve as the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club created opportunities for authentic connection based on shared values, rather than shared interests or social status. Mr. Navarro had then promoted to assistant principal, partly based on his innovative approaches to addressing bullying and conflict resolution. The restorative justice program that he had implemented following Keiko's recommendations had reduced disciplinary incidents by 60% and had become a model that other schools were adopting throughout the state. His mentorship had helped Keiko develop her own leadership skills and had prepared her for the next phase of her educational journey. The assembly began with presentations from various student organizations, showcasing projects that had contributed to the school's positive culture. The drama club had created anti-bullying skits that were performed at middle schools throughout the district. The debate team had developed workshops on ethical argumentation and respectful disagreement. The student council had implemented peer support programs that connected upperclassmen with underclassmen who were struggling with social integration. When Principal Martinez introduced Keiko to receive her leadership award, the applause that filled the auditorium represented something far more significant than typical recognition. Ceremony politeness. Students, teachers, parents, and community members were acknowledging someone who had transformed her own trauma into a catalyst for positive change, who had chosen growth over revenge, and who had demonstrated that real strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. When Keiko Tanaka arrived at our school 7 months ago, Principal Martinez said she brought with her not just exceptional academic credentials and remarkable athletic achievements, but also a quiet wisdom that our community desperately needed. She could have used her considerable abilities to dominate others, to seek revenge against those who wronged her, or to isolate herself from the challenges of high school social dynamics. Instead, she chose to share her knowledge to teach others about conflict resolution and personal empowerment, and to create opportunities for students to discover their own strength and potential. Keiko's acceptance speech had been carefully prepared, but as she stood at the podium looking out at an audience that included former tormentors, current friends, dedicated teachers, and proud family members, she felt compelled to speak from her heart rather than from her notes. 7 months ago, I came to this school trying to hide from who I was. She began. I thought that strength meant keeping my abilities secret, that wisdom meant avoiding confrontation, and that safety meant making myself invisible. But this community taught me that real strength comes from being authentic. Even when it's difficult, that true wisdom means standing up for others even when it's scary, and that genuine safety comes from building relationships based on mutual respect and support. She paused, looking toward the section where the Philosophy and Self-Defense Club members were sitting there, faces reflecting the pride and growth that had characterized their shared journey. My grandfather always taught me that martial arts training is about developing character, not just technique. He said that the goal isn't to become someone who can win fights, but to become someone who can help others avoid the need to fight. What I learned here at Eastbrook High is that the same principle applies to leadership and community building. The audience listened in rapt attention as Keiko continued. The bullying, harassment, and social cruelty that I experienced when I first arrived here weren't unique to this school, and they weren't unique to my situation. They were symptoms of a culture that had forgotten how to celebrate differences instead of punishing them, how to support vulnerability instead of exploiting it, and how to use power to protect others instead of to control them. But what I also learned is that culture can change when individuals choose to change it. When people decide to respond to cruelty with compassion, to meet fear with understanding, and to answer hatred with the kind of love that demands justice. Culture changes when we stop being bystanders to other people's suffering and start being advocates for everyone's dignity and safety. As Keiko concluded her speech, the standing ovation that erupted from the auditorium felt like a celebration, not just of her individual achievements, but of the collective transformation that the entire school community had experienced. Students who had once barely tolerated each other were applauding. Together, teachers who had felt powerless to address systemic problems were recognizing their own renewed sense of purpose, and parents who had worried about their children's emotional safety were witnessing evidence that positive change was not only possible but sustainable. After the assembly, Keiko found herself surrounded by students, teachers, and community members who wanted to thank her for her leadership, share their own stories of growth and transformation, and discuss plans for continuing the positive momentum that had been established. The conversations continued for hours as people who had been brought together by shared commitment to community improvement discovered new opportunities for collaboration and mutual support. That evening, as Keiko sat in her bedroom organizing college acceptance letters and scholarship offers, she received a video call from her grandfather in Los Angeles. Yuki Tanaka had watched a live stream of the assembly, and his weathered face showed the deep pride that came from seeing his teachings reflected in his granddaughter's actions. "Keiko-chan," he said, "do you remember the first lesson I taught you about martial arts? You said that karate begins and ends with respect." "Yes, but do you understand now what that really means?" Keiko considered the question, carefully thinking about everything she had experienced and learned over the past 7 months. "I think it means that true martial arts isn't about fighting. It's about creating the kind of world where fighting becomes unnecessary. It's about teaching people to respect themselves enough to demand better treatment, and to respect others enough to provide it." "Exactly," Yuki Tanaka said with a smile that conveyed decades of wisdom and love. "You have learned the strongest warriors are not the ones who defeat the most opponents. They are the ones who teach others that they don't need to be opponents at all. You have become a true mountain breaker, not because you can shatter stone, but because you can teach water how to flow around obstacles instead of crashing against them." As the school year drew to a close, Keiko reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from frightened transfer student to recognized community leader. The harassment campaign that had once threatened to destroy her had ultimately become the catalyst for discovering her true purpose. The skills that she had tried to hide had become tools for teaching others. The strength that she had been afraid to show had become a foundation for building something larger than herself. The college scholarship offers included opportunities to study conflict resolution, international relations, and educational leadership. But they also included invitations to continue her martial arts training at the highest levels and to explore how traditional disciplines could be integrated with modern approaches to community building and social justice. Brianna Ellis had quietly transferred to a private school after completing her suspension and community service requirements. Her parents had enrolled her in intensive therapy, and she had written a letter to Keiko expressing genuine remorse for her actions and gratitude for the restorative justice approach that had focused on healing rather than punishment. The letter had been brief, but sincere, acknowledging the harm that had been caused and expressing hope that both of them could learn from the experience. As Keiko prepared for graduation and the next phase of her educational journey, she realized that her time at Eastbrook High had taught her something that no tournament victory or academic achievement could have provided. She had learned that true power came not from what you could do to others, but from what you could inspire others to do for themselves and their communities. The mountain breaker had finally understood that the greatest victory wasn't conquering opponents, but teaching them to become allies in building a better world. And as she looked toward the future, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that end not with someone being defeated, but with everyone being transformed. The story that had begun with a terrified girl trying to hide her strength had become a legend about someone who discovered that real strength could only be measured by how many others you helped find their own. The bullies had tried to expose the new girl online, thinking they were revealing a weakness, but what they had actually done was awaken a force that would change everything and everyone it touched. Sometimes the person you choose to victimize is exactly the person the world needs to see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.